All right, today we are talking about long-term versus short-term environmental changes. This is actually something you learned in seventh grade. You're thinking about things that change the environment. Long-term would obviously be for a longer amount of time, like more than 5 years, multiple populations or generations. And short-term would be something that might be able to resolve within a year or so. So these include things that humans cause, such as pollution, and things that happen naturally, such as flooding. So in our notebook on page 9, we are going to make a basic, simple, easy T-chart, and we are going to fill in the T-chart with this word bank, and they are not on the correct sides already. I hope that's obvious. You have to choose what side they go on. So the first one is affects organisms immediately or affects organisms over generations. So here's my page 9 T-chart. Which one would immediately affect organisms? Of course, that one would be short term. And which one would be over subsequent generations? That means future generations, your kids, your kids. So that would be long term. A long term change is something that generations will be experiencing, be affected by for a long time to come. So your warm up today, you watched the video over oil spills, and which is crazy because that's something that we do. And I told you about the birds, and those birds are affected for generations because that oil destroys habitats. And so those birds are going back to that same island and it's not there or it's falling apart. So this would be affects subsequent generations. And that word subsequent is a big word, but it is a word they like to use on tests. It really just means future or multiple, following, affects following generations, future generations. Okay, and then we have no time to adapt, time to adapt. So no time to adapt. Which side would that go on? Well, it's going to go on the one that's shorter because it's going to happen right away. So and if it's long term, there will be time to adapt. And I think a better way to say that is their only choice is to adapt, often with a long-term change. Either organisms die or they adapt. And time to adapt. And really, we don't talk about adaptations in 8th grade. You did in 7th grade. But just a reminder, adaptations don't happen within one generation. So the birds can't magically just become immune to oil that generation. Remember, adaptations, it's not like giraffe's neck just popped up longer so that it could reach its food. It's not how it works. It's the giraffes with the longer necks were able to reach more food. Therefore, they were more likely to reproduce. So over time, mostly the giraffes with long necks are reproducing. So the necks get longer and you have mostly giraffes with long necks. So adaptations don't just appear out of random. They are traits that organisms already have or occur from a mutation. And those traits are just better suited for reproduction. So more of those animals reproduce. All right, next we have flood and oil spill. You should know from your warm-up that oil spill goes on long term. Most oil spills will cause lasting effects for a long time to come. Whereas a flood it's dramatic, it's scary, it's bad. But think about Houston. When Houston flooded, we were back in functioning. Obviously not 100%, but back in functioning. The water was dried up and things like that within less than a year. So if you're thinking about organisms in the environment, they could go back to their lives, their habitats were back within less than a year. Obviously, we felt the effects for longer, but the environment was restored. Then we have climate change and blizzard. So, what do y'all think for blizzard? I know that's probably foreign to y'all because Texas is not going to experience a blizzard, but a blizzard is really like a flood. It's bad for the time being, but it's not going to last years and years and years. What about climate change? Well, the definition of climate is long term. It's the temperatures and the environment of the temperature of an environment over a long period of time. So if the climate changes, that's going to be a long-term environmental change. Think about, I'm sure y'all have heard about the ice caps melting. That is a really big change. If that's the habitat for polar bears and it's melting, that's a really big deal. So maybe you're kind of noticing a pattern. Anything that permanently destroys a habitat or nearly permanently destroys a habitat is going to be long-term. Things that damage the habitat for the time being, but the habitat can regrow, those are short-term. When you destroy a habitat, you risk causing extinction, which is the last one. Extinction is, of course, long-term. Because if organisms go extinct, they're not coming back. They're gone forever. So long-term changes change an environment forever or for a very long time. Short-term changes are temporary changes. Sometimes y'all get confused of if it's a bad change, like if it sounds serious or not serious. But that's not what you're looking at. You're looking at will the environment be able to restore within a year or so? Or will the environment be changed for generations to come? Will organisms have no reason to adapt because the environment's going to restore? Or will they have no choice but to adapt because the environment is not going back to the way it was? That's the main differences. You're not going to have a question that says, is an oil spill a long-term or a short-term change? They're not going to be that easy. These questions instead are going to be far more challenging. They're not going to ask you, is it long-term or is it short-term? They're going to explain a change and ask you how you think that will affect the organisms. It helps you to know, is it long-term or is it short-term? So you know, do they not get to adapt? Do they have time to adapt? We are going to practice some of those questions today, and you're going to see that they aren't just little basic questions. They like to give you questions that have a lot of words in them. Paragraphs, pictures, charts. I like to use a lot of charts and graphs. So when you have a chart and graph, the good news is that your answer is in that chart or graph. You just have to analyze it. You have to read the graph, read the chart. These are not questions that you can just skim over. You're going to have to read and think critically. So for this next unit, those of you who do well are going to be those of you who care enough to do well. Those of you who do poorly are going to be those of you who don't care enough to do well. If you click through questions, if you that's too much reading, you're not going to do well. If you want to do well in this next unit, you're going to have to be a critical thinker. And we are definitely pushing you to do that as we prepare for your test next Thursday. So today's assignment is going to push you a little bit, and that's good. That's good for you. Let it push you. Think, read. We're only doing 4 questions today, so pushing in small amounts. You can do it. I believe in y'all.